Welcome back. A recent Time magazine article noted that religiosity is rapidly declining. It's becoming more commonplace to hear people say that religions, Islam and others, are a source of violence and aggression in society. To what extent is this an accurate representation of religions? Karen Armstrong's latest book, Fields of Blood, explores this question. Joining me is Dr. Shabir Ally to discuss Armstrong's book. Dr. Shabir, welcome to the show.
Pleasure to be on.
So let's get right into it. What are the overarching points that Karen argues in the book regarding religion and violence?
Well, basically, she's saying that if you trace the history of violence, because that's the subtitle of her book, Religion and the History of Violence, she's treating these as two separate things. There is religion on the one hand, and there's the history of violence on the other hand. And what she's showing is that actually violence among human beings actually predates what is known as the world's great religions. She says that, in fact, the human brain is composed of three levels. There's the reptilian brain, there's the limbic system, and there is the neocortex. Three different levels of thinking. One is the reptilian brain that has this fight or flight mechanism. That's what drives people to go forward, to hunt, and to kill. And then there is the limbic system, which is responsible for empathy. It helps us to sympathize with other human beings, and so we feel what they feel. We don't want to harm human beings. And then higher than that is the level of thinking of the neocortex, which is interesting that she puts it in this three-tier system, because the Quran speaks of a level at which people blame themselves. So that neocortex allows human beings to look back critically at what they have done. Now, the limbics, the reptilian brain that is responsible for predatory types of behavior is present in human beings, and this has nothing to do with religion. That's just how human beings are, and that to a certain extent drives human beings to war. Now, she says that prior to the development of agrarian societies, when human beings lived off hunting and gathering, everyone seemed to need each other. Food resources were scarce. You had to go out and hunt the animal and bring the meat in, and everybody had to eat. And it looks like the survival of the entire family or clan or tribe was a symbiotic relationship. Everybody depended on everybody else. Like, you had to have a group of hunters to go out and hunt some of these big, strong, fierce animals. And in fact, you might be hunted as well, so you had to be strong to defend your society. But developing from that, once human beings developed agriculture, they moved now into agrarian societies. Now suddenly they had surplus on hand. They had extra grain to store. Now there's a question of who controls this wealth of resources. So suddenly there are clashes over the overabundance or the supply of food, which is quite interesting. It's quite scary to think about it this way. And she shows that, in fact, in the history of world conflicts, it's usually about basically this, just in different forms. It may not be grain specifically, but people are just simply struggling over the control of resources.
How does she take this comparative approach, and how does that relate to religion?
Well, what she shows is that if you trace the history of religions, going back to pre-biblical times, if you look at the ancient religions of Mesopotamia, you see that there is this continuous dilemma that is being faced between, on the one hand, you want to not have violence, and on the other hand, you need to have a kind of state control that makes sure that people do not go to violence with each other. If you do not have this kind of state control, then there is this struggle for resources, everyone fighting against everyone else to control the resources. And what eventually happens is that the powerful entity of the state then develops to control the resources, and people are happy because now they don't have to fight with each other. The state controls the resources. But then what does the state do? The state then uses its own power to inflict violence on those who would not conform. And you have this kind of history of violence playing out throughout in the various societies in our history. Religions then step in to say, well, how do we control this violence? And religion actually has tended basically to give people a higher consciousness, to help them to think critically about themselves and to realize that violence it does not serve any good, even though there have been at times some interpretations of some of the world's great religions that could be contributory towards a more violent outlook on life. More so, religions have tended to calm the violence among human beings and to bring human beings back to an understanding of sympathy with others and a critical judgment of their own violence.
So if we go with this idea where, I guess if I'm understanding correctly, that it's really violence is, I guess, driven by this competition of resources, and that's the idea, and it's not necessarily religion, based upon religion or as a result of religion. How are we to understand sort of, a lot of the argument these days is, you have organizations like ISIS, Al-Qaeda, etc., and they're always linked to religion. So how do we, I guess, what does she say? Does she say anything about that? And
yeah, I would like to say that it's a very hefty volume, 512 pages long, and it's packed with information. The resources that she's brought together here, the number of scholarly works that she has cited is amazing if you look at her endnotes. But the work seems to have gone to press before the rise of ISIS, and so there's nothing mentioned in the book about ISIS, but there's a very detailed study of the development of groups like Al-Qaeda, a study of Osama bin Laden and his thinking. And she shows actually that here too there is a struggle over land and nationality, with Osama bin Laden's main beef being that the foreign occupiers have come into the soil of Muslims, and they are somehow controlling a regime that is actually oppressive to the Muslim people. So there is, even in that analysis, the main theme of Armstrong's book, that what is at the heart of these conflicts is not religion per se, though religion may be brought into it, but at the heart of these conflicts is a sort of struggle either over country or nation or oil resources, or some such factor.
so it's never really about religion then?
Well, she doesn't say it's never really about religion, because religion somehow is always brought in many of these conflicts. But if you were to take suicide bombings, for example, which now we're all reeling from, and we would never encourage and we totally condemn. At the same time, she shows, citing Robert Pape's excellent study on this, Dying to Win, she shows that in fact the Tamil Tigers were the first to use this technique, suicide bombings, and they have little concern for religion. Moreover, she showed that the Muslim reaction to world conflicts and their adoption, or the adoption of some Muslims of this technique, comes after much grievance that Muslims have expressed, grievances that they feel are unheeded. For example, the suffering of the Palestinian people. So it's again not because of a religious teaching that says that Muslims ought to do this. In fact, quite the contrary. She's shown that in the history of Islamic interpretation, there have been scholars who have quite clearly said, and this is like a systemic type of study of Islamic scholarship, she shows that Muslim scholarship on the whole has denounced harming civilians and non-combatants. And yet this arises from within some Muslim societies, and not because of the religious teaching, but in fact despite the religious teaching, goes against the religious teaching, but comes out of deep frustration over grievances that Muslims have suffered in various parts of the world.
Thanks very much, Dr. Shabir.
You're welcome.